Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon, depends on where you're joining from. This is Belén Gallego. I'm reporting from ATA Insights in our office in Madrid. And today we're looking into the solar energy potential in Nigeria. As you know, Nigeria is a large country with, I think, 180 million people. So actually the opportunities for growth here for the electrical grid and solar and wind, renewable energy is really high, since there is not a lot of people that are currently connected. And we're going to learn a lot more about, what is going on in an update today. And we have two key experts working with us today. So I would ask first, Erebor, if you could introduce yourself very shortly and also tell us where you're joining today from.
Okay, hello folks, this is Erebor Kogan. I'm the MD in Nemoante. Right now I am in Abuja, the capital of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We've been doing solar power development, renewable energy development for the past 6 years, and been in the energy space for the past 15 years. But I'll probably give you a bit more insight about my background during the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Erebor. So Erebor is going to be talking to us very, very soon. And we also have with us today Ayodele. You just made it in the nick of time. Well done. Can you introduce yourself and telling us where you're joining from?
Yes, my name is Ayodele Oni, like Raishon rightly pointed out. I'm a commercial lawyer to start with interest in power. I've been involved in most of the power projects in Nigeria, many of the big ticket power projects. I'm advising on a number of my firm and my firm being Bloomfield. I'm a partner in the law firm Bloomfield Law Practice in Lagos, and I'm speaking from Lagos. We've been involved in several power projects in the last few years, particularly a number of renewable projects for NG Phoenix, looking to come into Nigeria to do some renewable, to Middle Band Solar One, a robust company, to Alten with some IFC support, to a number of other companies in Nigeria doing mini grids, looking to do solar home systems, and a couple of other such projects. We've also advised, we're also lawyers to the Rural Electrification Agency, done a bit of work with the Rural Electrification Agency, pushing solar in Nigeria and pushing renewables, generally speaking. So yes, that's it. And you learn a bit more about my firm and what we do, and a bit more about Nigeria as you go on.
Excellent. And this is what we're looking forward to do. Thank you very much, Ayodele. So we've got people in the chat, also you guys on the other side, and we cannot see you, but we know you're there. So please join where you're joining from. So far, we've got someone from NG in South Africa, and I know there's a lot more of you there. So please let us know and maybe introduce yourselves through the chat. And without further ado, let's get started for this webinar today. I'd like to ask Erebor if you could please share your screen and then begin your presentation. And whilst Erebor shares the screen, I'd like to just let you know things that if you attend our webinars, which many of you do, we will send you the recordings and the presentations so that you can take a look at them. Usually take a couple of days and they're with you. And also we have a Q&A box at the bottom. As soon as Erebor and Ayodele are done, then we'll take some questions, time permitting. So please send all those questions through to us. And Erebor, off you go. Just unmute your phone, your microphone, and please go ahead and speak to us.
Again, nice to be here. This slide is essentially about solar energy potential in Nigeria, being put together by ATA Insights. In terms of outline, I just give a bit more depth about myself and the company, provide a Nigerian context, talk about beyond fossils and the history of solar in Nigeria, dovetail into micro and mini grids, financing and funding sources, and then obviously give some highlights on the challenges in Nigeria, and a quick look. I will hazard to be a prophet here and talk about outlook for solar in Nigeria. I won't spend too much time here. I have over 17 years experience, first degree in Nigeria, worked in the energy space focus on the IOCs like Shell and Chevron, and then started Nemoante, raising finance and collaborating with world-class institutions for developing a portfolio of projects in renewable energy. Specifically in solar, we have advanced developments with Alten based in Madrid, ENGIE, and several other companies. And I have an MBA from the UK, plus in my spare time, I do a lot of work for the UN as a national expert. Nigeria. Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, the largest economy in Africa. We had a recession last year, but we bounced back and we're quite resilient. Population is growing quite fast. And the rule of thumb is that for every 1 million people, you need about 1 gigawatts. So that's a good indicator of the sort of investments and opportunity in Nigeria. Right now, the installed capacity is about 12 gigawatts from 25 grid-connected generating plants, mostly based on gas and hydro. But we have several gas issues, making about 50% of the population without electricity or with epileptic supply. In comparison, the consumption is very low. You can see statistics on Brazil and South Africa, for example. We've noticed that the global majority of investments to solve this problem has been dedicated or sourced from renewable energy or financing for renewable energy. On the map on the left just shows the grid connection, the TCN grid, and how it spread across the country. You will notice that because of the gas power plants in the south, the grid there is very strong. Double circuits, 330 kV lines, spiraling out from the south, moving to the center where the capital is, and then generally a bit weaker in the northwest and the northeast. So why solar? I mean, we need to look beyond fossil fuels. Like I said, it's big population, big country, most of the gas in the south, there are a lot of issues with the gas on the commercial side, on the transportation side because of poor maintenance of the pipeline, militant activities a few times in breaking up the pipelines. So the country needs to go solar. We need to, and why? One is very competitive. Right now, yes, we're seeing EPC costs for solar going slightly below $1 million per megawatt. It's predictable. It's independent. You don't need to, I mean, it's without boundary. It doesn't obey state capitals or national laws. The sun will shine everywhere. It's fast in terms of lead time. It's clean. We can see what's happening globally with global change. I mean, climate change. It's innovative. More and more, we're seeing the use of trackers to improve yield. We're seeing storage come into play. And we're also big on being compliant with global mandates, such as the COP21. And as a function of that, we also have a national renewable energy plan called the 2030, which is to have 30% of renewable energy by the year 2030. So this is a bit of a context. Moving on, what are the historical sort of antecedents for solar in Nigeria? I think once we moved into the democratic system of government in 1999, there's a lot of solar in the budget by politicians and by government, focus on amenities, traffic lights, street lights, CCTV cameras, water pumps. And over the last maybe 20 years, you've seen government budget about $20 million every year for this sort of government projects, either coming from the National Assembly or coming from the ministries, and also down to the states, across 36 states. And then you've seen a lot of international support. For instance, the Japanese government commissioned last year a 1.2 megawatts solar power plant to support the water coming into the capital. The next area has been the internal private funded projects. These are urban houses mostly, base stations. We have about 30,000 base stations. We probably need about 50,000. Bank branches and ATMs, about 14,000 of these. More and more of these are getting to use solar because of expensive diesel. And then you have at least one data center that has built a 1.5 megawatt solar power plant to ensure 24/7 operations. Recently, companies like Total have been taking their fuel stations off the grid by powering them with solar. In the last 18 months, there's been a lot of interest in microgrids. And we have about 20 microgrids, and there are efforts to scale this to about 10,000 sites by the year 2023. I will speak a bit more about this later. And then you have the commercial industrial sector, which is a bit embryonic. So you have government agencies like REA talking about energizing education, talking about energizing markets. And you have a couple of factories, particularly in the north, that are trying to get off expensive diesel. And you have a couple of malls that we're working with to create hybrid systems. Then over the past 3 years, there was, from the Azura IPP financial close, there was a lot of push to bring in utility scale solar. And this was more important because of the need to create energy security and an energy mix, given the issues in the Niger Delta and with gas. And so it's a strategic policy by the government. In total, you have about 14 projects, which will probably come on stream in a couple of years, bringing in 1.1 gigawatts. Very quickly, these 14 projects are spread across the country, from Lokoja to Katsina, one in Enugu, in the southeast, but mostly in the middle belt and the northwest. Some of it following where the grid is. You have total investments of over $2 billion, jobs created from these solar projects, if all conditions, rather, all things being equal, about 15,000 jobs. Equity investments put on the line about $750 million. And we have a PPA tariff of 11.5 US cents signed in 2016, but this might change because the sovereign guarantee would only cover, as we understand informally today, will only cover 7.5 US cents. But there's a lot of enthusiasm, and we hope that within the next 6 months, these projects will close. Mini grids, or I know in the presentation we talk about microgrids, but I mean, it's a big country, so we prefer to move to mini grids or talk about mini grids rather than micro, given the opportunity. So last year, I was consulted by the regulator and a couple of the international support agencies to advise on the mini grids, because we've developed a lot of experience in trying to do solar in Nigeria over the past 6 years. And the development experience is not going to differ from mini grids to utility scale. What you do for $1, or rather what you do for 1 megawatts, you might as well do it for 100. So the experience is similar. So you have two sets of mini grids that have now been put into law. You have the isolated mini grids and you have the connected mini grids. The isolated mini grids are in two categories: the less than 100 kilowatts in the micros aspect, which is very quick to do. You don't need a license. You have no obligation to meet grid code standards. And you have the 100 to 1 megawatts where permits are required. So more project development experience will be needed. You have to be compliant as well. And you have a buyout for the DISCO to pay for all your capex when the grid comes to your location. The area that's also very exciting is the connected mini grids, where there are tripartite agreements that have already been standardized by the regulator, where you pay the distribution company for the use of the assets, and where the grid is weak, and where there's a lot of opportunity here, because here you can bring in longer term finance, and you can do larger scales. For instance, you can do 1 megawatt times 10, thereby bringing economies of scale into play. Now, where over the past 2 years, where have there been mini grids? So this just gives you an idea on the left of where the mini grids are. And you can see they're all over the country. You have them in the southwest. You have them in the Niger Delta, in the south. You have them in the middle belt, in the state capital. In the northwest, you have them almost close to the Niger border in Sokoto. So you can do mini grids virtually everywhere. And we're seeing by recent studies done by GIZ, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, and the Rocky Mountain Institute, of significant opportunity, close to revenues of $8 billion, and opportunities of about $20 billion, and significant mini grid locations have been identified already with capacity, with population, with some studies on demand load in about 7,000 sites in Nigeria. And all is left really now is just demand studies and then follow the procedure under the regulation. Now, you have all these opportunities. Where the financing and funding source is going to come from? Now, when there was privatization in 2012 or 2013, a lot of the investments, there were 2.5 billion in the privatization, buy up the government legacy distribution companies and generation companies. And all of this money, about maybe 10 to 20%, came from local investors and from banks, local banks. I think traditionally investments in Nigeria do a one-stop from South Africa, because all the global companies have their bases for Africa in South Africa, and then come into Nigeria. But I think about that time, the South African government had started the tenders for the REAP. I think about $20 billion were going into those programs, those tenders. And so, unlike where MTN came in from South Africa to catalyze the telecom business, investing about $285 million for the license, there was very little international investments in the power sector. So when we developers came on board, we had to de-risk the projects with our own resources, then partner with international equity investors like Alten Energy, and also IFC Infraventures. They were fantastic and were able to come into one of my projects even before we got a generation license. And I really commend IFC for that. Now, post-privatization, we're seeing high net worth individuals and institutional investors beginning to show some appetite. Specialized funds like Allon, partly funded by Shell, have also begun to make some investments. And Nigerian institutions like the Bank of Industry, which is a local DFI, and the Rural Electrification Agency have also been putting a lot of money into solar projects, particularly mini grids. And you've been having grants from USA, DFID, GIZ, focused on solar home systems and mini grids. The DFIs, that's on the senior debt side, have also signed term sheets and have mandates out there. AFC, AFDB, FMO, DG, Propaco, mostly European DFIs, and the AFDB are very big on Nigeria and all have significant envelopes for projects, utility scale projects, and they're beginning to also go into off-grid projects. One important funding source is the PSRP because of the challenges, the liquidity challenges of the sector. And I'll quickly talk about that. Now, this is an estimate of what the PSRP is, which is the Power Sector Recovery Plan. So you have the World Bank partnering with the federal government of Nigeria, where they have received Federal Executive Council approval at the highest level in Nigeria, with the president backing this, where there's a plan to bring in governance and some institutional support into the sector, and also support the government in meeting some of the deficits in cash flow, and also in supporting transmission company, that's TCN, role in electrification initiatives, providing guarantees, all targeted at the public sector institutions. Then you have the IFC also looking at investments in the distribution companies, and MIGA providing political risk assurance targeted at the private sector. So in total, we're seeing over $5 billion of different sort of funding flavors coming to the market within the next 6 months. Already, the $350 million by the IFC and World Bank has been approved, and disbursements might start in the next couple of months. Now, I'll speak about that in a bit more detail, because this is live and is ready to go. So you have the about 150 focus on mini grids, and that is 70 million for competitive bidding, where the World Bank will select 250 sites and do a tender for those. A bit similar to the small power grid program in South Africa. And then you have another $80 million for, will I say, unsolicited programs, where you look for your own projects, and the World Bank will support those projects with $80 million. Then you also have, further down, the 105 for universities. About 37 universities across the country will be given energy through solar. Let me just take a step back. The $150 million for mini grids doesn't always have to be solar, but we see that maybe 80% of that will be solar. So you might see some small hydro come into play. And then you have $20 million in technical assistance for regulatory support and assessments, and also EIA safeguards. So this is money that's available now, and it's ready to go to catalyze and to open the market up. Now, what are the challenges? We've seen the opportunities, we've seen the funding coming in, and Nigeria can be a complicated place to do business. And from my experience, you probably have about 4 major challenges. And I've also gone ahead to talk about the mitigants and resolutions that we've done and we see. So for instance, site acquisition. In Nigeria, it's very peculiar. Sometimes, they talk about, a lot of times, they talk about the Equator principles, the IFC principles around land acquisition. But, Nigeria is not Africa. And Nigeria, the land is owned, is put in trust. All land under the Land Use Act is owned by the government, and it's held in trust by the governor. Even though the communities can own land, but in terms of getting title, you have to use the Land Use Act. So what we've done is to go to the person that has the largest access to land, which is the state governor and the states. And what we've done is to create PPPs, public-private partnership structures with the states, and do a lot of community engagements. We'll put in place a separate fund for CSR, and also involve the kings and the community leaders in our projects. The next challenge is insecurity. Not a lot of technical and EPC capabilities in the country. Significant civil engineering, of course. Significant oil and gas experience, but not a lot for solar. Now, in terms of insecurity, I bundled this together because you sort of have the same resolution. So in terms of technical security EPC, the best thing is to have local knowledge and partnerships that will tell you where to go. If you look at the map on the first slide, you will see the map of Nigeria with the solar irradiation. the best solar irradiation is in the northeast. And if you're sitting in London or Madrid or Johannesburg, you might just put a pin to the northeast of Nigeria and say, oh, that's where I need to go. And, you tell everybody in the world that you're going to the northeast. But without just making a phone call to the local guy and asking him what's happening in the northeast, you might make a big mistake, because the northeast there's a huge insecurity going on there. And so we focus in the middle belt because of the grid connection, because of load, because of demand, and because of logistics and better security. So that's where local knowledge comes into play. And in picking the right sort of technical partners on the civil engineering side, that also comes into play. And that has provided a big resolution to dealing with the concept or the thinking around insecurity. Foreign exchange, almost of the funding that's coming to solar has been international. And even it's local, it's essentially a local player with international money. So there's currency fluctuations. How do you deal with that? So it's great that you can hedge the Naira, and there are entities under the DFIs that have these facilities for hedging. You can also index your PPA or your offtake agreements to the dollar, and so that provides some resolution. But I think the most important thing for us as developers is to be very frugal and not splash out money when it's not needed, and timing funding focus purely so that the milestones will drive your funding, and therefore you're not so exposed to your equity to development risk, and also flowing with the economy, the economic cycle, and that has been very useful to my partners in managing this particular challenge. Policy volatility for me is the biggest challenge. All the other three you can deal with from an expert opinion or perspective. But policy is driven by, in some instance, lack of access to information, or what I call information asymmetry, where there's information silos. And it's very difficult for people in government to really engage with developers, people in the trenches who are actually getting the work done. They tend to engage with international known names who also are not so well informed about the intricacies of development and intricacies for each location. So what we've done is to have a lot of advocacy. We've created a roundtable for solar developers, and we've engaged people in the government, and we've seen some headway, and we'll continue to work on this. But in terms of changing government, you have to play the long game. This is infrastructure. You're talking about, on the utility side, a PPA of 20 years. There's no governor, there's no president that's going to be in power in Nigeria for 20 years. Maximum is 8 years. Some will do 4. So you've got to play the long game and not be driven by changes in political parties, changes in government, because the infrastructure would outlive any government. So you have to play the long game and engaged all the different political parties with the different manifestos, and manage the policy information asymmetry by working as a group and speaking with one voice. So this is a little summary of the challenges and resolutions that we've also put into play to make some progress in the market. Now, just hazard of prophecy, what do I see about the future of solar? So we're moving from 1.2 megawatts in utility to over 2 gigawatts, with lower tariffs coming into play than other sources of energy. By the year 2030, based on the government's goal, we'll probably see about 8,000 megawatts of utility solar come into play. Significant skills transfer, internalizing the value chain. So right now you have a 7.5 megawatts facility that builds solar panels. I see more and more entities now coming in to build solar panels, like we saw in South Africa. Creating of thousands of jobs in areas where there's not a lot of industry, which creates what I call a geopolitical balance, poverty alleviation, and improvements in security. Conservation of foreign exchange, because we're no longer having to buy diesel and having to bring in a lot of these fossil fuel inputs into driving generation. For instance, we're the largest importers of generators in the world. We have, I think, up to 15 gigawatts of self-generation using diesel generators, and that's a lot of drain on foreign exchange. Solar is clean, so you're going to see improvement in the environment for sure, reduction in desertification, particularly in the north, and we've seen also a lot of desertification and reduction in forests in the south as well. And then I think that we'll become a global powerhouse, and we'll see increased investor confidence. I like to talk about Scatec. Scatec has one of the solar projects in Nigeria, the utility scale ones. I think the one in Jigawa is a partner there. And Scatec moved to their headquarters from Europe to Africa, to take advantage of the opportunities in solar there. And now they've invested in Nigeria. So I see opportunities for international firms to go the Scatec way. And I know that unfortunately South Africa is back in recession, but we see Nigeria as a place where we will become a global powerhouse in solar in the very near future. So thank you very much. That's about it from me, and happy to take questions later on.
Thank you very much, everybody. It was a great presentation, very thorough, so really much appreciated. And I do hope as well that Nigeria becomes the powerhouse that it deserves to be. Actually, in terms of energy, you guys have always been, strong. So it'd be good to see renewable energy strength there too. Could you please stop sharing your screen at the top? And I'm going to ask Ayodele, if you could please share your screen with us. And we're now ready for your presentation as well. Hi, Ayodele, excellent,
Yeah.
very good.
Yes,
just press it so that it's large screen, because at the moment we can only see it.
That's what I'm trying to do.
And we have already 3 questions in the Q&A box, but don't be shy, send them through. Okay, we'll try to get to them once Ayodele is done. Okay, so go ahead, give us your presentation.
Okay, yeah, so we're looking at solar energy potentials in Nigeria. I will be speaking to a number of issues outside of these slides. Law can be boring, so I'll try to make it a bit more interesting than just reading out laws or regulations and policies. We'll talk about other practical issues. So Bloomfield and myself, it's a 3-partner firm with over 15 other lawyers. We've been supporting the Rural Electrification Agency. We're ranked among the leading energy firms. I mean, we're a full service firm. So Legal 500, Wizwood Legal Chambers. Clients' feedback has always been that we provide excellent quality of work and prompt delivery. I've been a consultant to the UK DFID, particularly on post-privatization restructuring of power sector as a senior legal consultant for 2 years. I'm still under contract. I was under contract until, I still am, but my last project ended a year ago. These are some of our clients: Towa Energy, Middleband Solar One Limited, that's one of Verabo's companies, GeoGrid, Mainstream Energy, Nemoante. We're doing stuff for Computer Warehouse Group under the new MAP regulations, the meter asset providers regulations. We're advising Computer Warehouse Group. NERC will provide advice to NERC. NG and Phoenix, under NG and Phoenix plan to do solar home systems in Nigeria. We're currently advising that company and its entry into Nigeria. Alten, Millhouse, under Energizing Education. Millhouse is building a power plant at UNN. Solar, these are other clients. We do work for the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, Actis, General Electric. Yeah, that's basically a bit about the firm. Now, Nigeria's renewable energy potentials. People have, very recently, a lot of people have been speaking to energy federalism, where different areas of Nigeria that have got comparative advantage, some of them can be taken off the grid and then consider having renewable energy. We say this because research has shown that up to 40% of the Nigerian population is not even connected to the grid. I mean, depending on who you speak to, some people would say it's as little as 35%, some people say it's as high as almost 60%. I mean, depending on whose research you're looking at and who does that research. So it's actually the case that quite a number of people, and I do travel quite a bit, particularly when I have to do, when I have to look at projects, when I need to advise and they need me to go on site. And I see several communities not connected to the grid at all, even in the West, where you think majority seem to be connected to the grid. So people have spoken about Nigeria's potential from solar to wind in parts of Lagos and other areas of the country, to solar in some parts of the north, to hydroelectricity, renewable energy, generally speaking, geothermal and biomass. This is just general. Yes, with respect to Nigeria's renewable energy potential, there have been claims that the volume of, or the quantity of electricity we can generate from solar energy alone is as much as 258 million barrels of oil equivalent annually. You know, this is enormous, and it's research showing that. And Forbes magazine has said that by 2020 they expect that renewable energy would even be cheaper than fossil fuel. You see a number of houses who already have solar panels, and it's just that initial cost, and they need to maintain, say, once in 4 years, change batteries or top up the electrolytes in their batteries. So we see that there's that gradual shift. And one thing that makes it generally interesting for us is that we see a lot of international companies looking to come into Nigeria, and no one is speaking about the grid. Everyone is speaking of doing off-grid. Everyone is speaking of doing solar or wind energy. That's also important. Now, there's always that question, and goes back to part of what Erabo was speaking to about laws and policy consistency. I mean, every international investor wants to be sure that even if the law is bad, is this law going to be the case for 10 years, for 5 years, so that I can plan? You don't want to come into a country under a particular regime, legal regulatory regime. 2 years later, everything changes. There's no stability. Investors are concerned about stability. They first need to understand what the legal and regulatory regime is, and they then want to understand how things have evolved over a period of time. I'm sure Erabo would agree with me that our power sector is in evolution, is evolving as we speak, and things seem to be looking up. There are challenges like it's raised, but things seem to be looking up. There are a number of rules, regulations just to support. Yes, my only fear is that we do not get to a situation of over-regulation, or a situation where we have several legislation, and we then, like the petroleum industry, look to put everything under one umbrella. At the moment, we have the Electric Power Sector Reform Act. That's a primary legislation relating to the on that project. Environmental impact assessment could be very crucial. We've got the Nigerian Electricity Management Services Agency, particularly dealing with issues around accidents, metering, meter quality, and matters such as those. Now, to promote renewables, particularly solar and other renewables, there's a mini grid regulations. It's a 2016-2017 piece of set of regulations to promote people having mini grids separate from what is known as the national grid. And Erabo had mentioned there are two types. There's the isolated and there's interconnected. And I mean, one interesting thing is from my experience, well, because we're currently advising on one and a potential second. When it comes to the interconnected, you will be working with the relevant distribution company in that area. You're isolated means you are not connected to a distribution doing your generation, separate from what currently exists. For the interconnection, and if I were to advise, I would advise more for the interconnected, because you are likely to get more support from the distribution network. And part of the challenges you see in Nigeria is Nigerians going to court over certain issues. This goes saying, we don't think this person has this right. Improve substantially, in my view, where you do interconnected. Because the interconnected mini grid we're currently advising on at Bloomfield has got a lot of support from the relevant distribution network. I wouldn't be able to say so much about that distribution network at the moment because of client confidentiality, but there's been a lot of support. There's a renewable feed-in tariffs. I mean, at some point that was suspended because there were issues as to whether the prices, I mean, those prices were the highest in the world, anywhere in the world. And there were issues around whether those prices were too high and whether it should be lower. And I'm sure Erabo can speak more to that because of issues they've had around pricing for one of their projects, or one of their solar projects. And the 14 solar projects he alluded to previously. We've got the power policy, and the power policy appears, National Electric Power Policy appears to be the precursor for everything else we're saying in the power sector now. That and the Electric Power Sector Reform Act are very, very useful. There was also the roadmap in 2010. Very, very useful document. We've got Nigerian National Electric Power Policy. We've got Renewable Energy Master Plan. We've got policy documents relating to renewable energy. We've got the action program, and we've got documents by the Rural Electrification Agency. So all of these are the policies and some of the regulations and legislative enactment. There's no such word as enactment, so that'd be a typo. It will be legislative enactment. Okay, enactment. I mean, I think that might be correct. Now, at the center, you've got the Regulatory Commission. You've got a separation like what you see in the petroleum industry in, say, Brazil or in Norway. You've got a separation of roles. You've got the regulator who doesn't get involved in the business, and you've got the policymaker. The policymaker is the Ministry of Power, which makes policy. You've got the Energy Commission working with the Ministry of Power. You've got the Bureau of Public Enterprises. Prior to this time, the power sector was one big integrated utility that did electricity generation, that did transmission, and that did distribution. And like most everywhere else in the world, government is usually a bad businessman. So over time, you get to a point where you decide to privatize. And during the privatization, government ownership was by the Bureau of Public Enterprises. And government, Bureau of Public Enterprises, we've got the Transmission Company of Nigeria. We've got one transmission system. I mean, almost every other country in the world too has got one transmission system, save for, I think, Russia and the US. And this will also be because of sheer size. And I mean, issues around national security concerns also ensure that most countries either want to have one or want to ensure that ownership is retained in the government. Because if anything goes wrong with the transmission system, if you're at war with another country, or you've got diplomatic issues, and it's a privately owned company owned by foreigners, then you can have issues with your transmission system, and it's going to affect the entire nation. You've got the Rural Electrification Agency. This is an agency really pushing rural electrification, particularly through renewable energy sources, solar in particular. And I've seen them look at other options like wind and do a few other things. And interestingly, we do a bit of work for them, and we recently got a mandate. I can't speak so much more about that at the moment. There's a bulk trader. I mean, it's supposed to be an entity. And interesting thing about the bulk trader is that the bulk trader is supposed to be temporary. Nigeria doesn't run what South Africa runs, where you have a single buyer model. Nigeria is a multiple buyer model. You can sell to a distribution company directly. You can sell under the eligible customer regulations. You can sell to large industries. There are rules, and we as lawyers, your advisors, can hold your hands and help you navigate those challenges, because we're currently advising, my firm and I are currently advising on 2 of those eligible customer situations, 2 transactions in that regard. The bulk trader basically is supposed to bulk purchase electricity, particularly electricity sold via the grid, and to resell to distribution companies in particular. But it's not just, you are not under any obligation to sell directly to the bulk trader. You could sell directly to these distribution companies or eligible customers who have been declared eligible. I mean, there are permits, there are regulations that you need to take into consideration. And the Ministry of Water Resources, depending on whether you're doing hydro, if you're doing hydropower, there are issues you need to take into consideration with respect to power, yes, water rights issues and all of those. Then there's a Ministry of Environment. So you've got a lot of ministries, particularly when you want to do projects. Yeah, some of these fall away when it's off-grid renewables, like where it's solar, or where you're doing eligible customers and you're connecting either directly through a distribution network or directly to the buyer. then you may not be speaking to the bulk trader. There might not be issues around rural electrification, and there may be. You wouldn't be needing the Transmission Company of Nigeria or the Bureau of Public Enterprises. But these are just generally the regulators and enablers for renewable energy in Nigeria. And when you do projects in Nigeria, you need to take into consideration that you may be speaking to one or more of them. Now, there are a number of incentives in the sector, and like I mentioned, there'll be a few things that might not be in the slides I'll be speaking to. In the last 2-3 years, there's been a lot, maybe in the last 5-6 years, there've been a lot of activities in the power sector, maybe even 10 years. A lot of new regulations, incentives to encourage people to get involved. There's the pioneer status you get, could be as much as 5 years, but you get an initial period and maybe extended. Initial 3-year period and maybe extended for an additional 2 years where you do not pay taxes. You've got other incentives. I mean, there have been issues around one of those incentives regarding panels, solar panels. It's supposed to be customs free, but very recently there have been arguments as to whether the customs have been surcharging. And I mean, one thing that's an incentive, and you may not see it as one, because I've said there's a plan for 30%. It's been encouraged. There's an encouragement for people to come into the country and do renewables. And there are also opportunity for soft loans from the government. You know, interest rates are double digit in Nigeria, generally speaking. But there are programs where you can get way lesser than that. Now, where are we in terms of those projects? I mean, Eraba will probably be in a better position to speak more to this because he's a big player in that industry, and he said a few things about those. 40 solar PPAs were signed in 2016, and very recently, the put-call option agreement, in the last year or so, 1 or 2 of those developers have signed, and a few more are also signing. So, I mean, it looks like we're on our way to getting those projects, reaching financial close and getting those projects started. Yeah, I mean, many of them posted development security, financial end has been moved financial close has been moved a few times because of the challenges in the sector. The energizing economics, energizing institutions and education program, which Erabo spoke to with respect to the Rural Electrification Agency. And there are rules, there are laws governing all of this. The Rural Electrification Agency has got its enabling legislation, and there are other pieces of legislation and initiatives currently being supported to ensure that there's rural electrification. And that's an area where investors may look at. Now, what are the opportunities we see? The potential to reduce the cost of electricity in Nigeria, that's an opportunity. And the fact that more people may look to those options, particularly residential homes, smaller businesses, where guys can, and other similar circumstances. Improve rural electrification. Like I mentioned to you, a number of the big international utilities are looking to come into Nigeria, are already on their way to Nigeria, and 1 or 2 of them already are doing solar home systems and such other similar projects. So there's potential for more. I mean, to the extent, and like people would typically say, the more there are challenges, the more there are opportunities. If one were to even look at it if one was to look at it from a political point of view, each government wants to score a point with respect to improving power sector. It then means that those opportunities exist for you to help them achieve their aim whilst also being profitable and adding value. With more people, you may have seen one advert very recently on TV and in social media, and once it's dark, because once it's dark and power supply isn't good, grid power supply isn't good, everyone goes to bed. But with more power, with renewables serving to an extent a stopgap, and even for the long term, it's going to support economic growth, and there'll be opportunities for more jobs. There'll be opportunities for service providers, metering, IT, and those even fintech. We see a lot of fintech already, where you can pay with your phone credits, where you can pay through other means which previously did not exist. It's environmentally friendly. I mean, that goes without saying. You can get carbon credits and such other things. Now, Nigeria is a country, and I always say to people, we are a capitalist yet communal country. I say this because, and Eraba will probably bear me witness that he probably every now and then sends credit to his grandma in the village, only not necessarily because she can't afford it, but just a token. Feels, oh yeah, I want to make her as comfortable as possible. So even if we say purchasing power for anything is 30% of the Nigerian population, generally speaking, that 30% is likely to spread it out to up to 60, 70%. Because every month there are people I buy credit for. And I'm sure it's the same thing for most other people. There are people whose recharge you do. Before my grandma passed away 2 years ago, I got her solar in her home. And every month I was recharging that. I was responsible for getting that recharge. So that opportunity does exist. So regardless of what statistics say about Nigerians, or Nigeria as a country having the highest number of poor people, those poor people can still afford certain things. They would afford those things indirectly, not necessarily through income they get from working, but because they've got people back in the cities who are going to be supporting them. So it's always very erroneous to think that because only 20 million or 30 million people can directly afford something, another 20 or 30 million who are dependents to those people who wouldn't afford it. So that there's serious business opportunities. I'll be repeating it if I mentioned everything Erabo had said, because those things we had in mind too. There are issues around how do you get paid, there are issues around currency fluctuations, and it's giving some of those solutions. I mean, you want to think of a payment security, you want to think of getting a DFI involved, you want to think of getting the IFC, getting the World Bank involved in your project, then you are likely to get some form of government support, or you're likely to know that government is unlikely, or the chances of not getting paid or failures or changing the rules midway probably get more reduced. Then the grid has been a problem. But I mean, mostly, most of the renewable projects are likely to be, a sizable number of them are likely to be off-grid, solar home systems and all of those. So the grid being a problem is actually a benefit or an opportunity for a discerning investor. Now, currency fluctuations spoke to, you can hedge, you can structure your project in a particular way, and that's why you need very good local partners, because they then tell you what the booby traps are, then they tell you how you can navigate some of those booby traps. A lot is happening in Nigeria where you even have companies that can supply meters now. Companies looking to develop, to build infrastructure, very good quality. So it's not necessarily all the case that you need to incur foreign strong advisors. You need strong partners who are going to help you navigate through the several challenges you may face doing some of the business in Nigeria. Politics is another issue. It's mentioned that no president is last. You need to engage the government. Of course, you may, as much as possible, be politically neutral, but you need to engage the government of the day. I need the right partner. Policy volatility. You need experienced advisors. You need experienced local partners. You need long-term planning. It's not short-term, because one thing we realize in Nigeria, and it's very important and it's very interesting. From administration to administration, we see that things seem to improve in terms of consistency. If someone started a project, many of the things currently being done by this current administration were commenced by the last administration. Privatization, rural electrification issues, regulations to support renewables, regulations to support off-grid. Many of these have been started by the previous administration. We've seen this administration continuing it. So volatility, change, all of that is also changing in Nigeria, such that we have less and less volatility. So
I think we might have lost Ayodele in there. I don't know. Can you hear it, Ravor? I can't hear him anymore.
Yeah, I can hear you.
But not him, right? Okay.
But yeah, but I can't hear him.
Yeah, I think he's just, unfortunately, there was something there with the data. It's a shame, you know, because we were nearly, hi.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what went wrong.
No, don't worry. Just probably a Wi-Fi thing. Do you have much left? Because anyway, we don't have a lot of time.
No, I'm done. So that's it.
Okay.
If you got any questions from a legal, policy, or regulatory point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, both of you, for the presentations. Actually, there is a few questions out there, and I think we only have a couple of minutes, so we won't be able to do much. But I think the one that has been, you know, sort of like done and seconded, and I know that Erebor, you've already answered it, but I think it's worth bringing it to the, you know, to the people as well. They're asking, could you please provide any details or any signs that the 14 IPP projects are actually moving forward and that the government so far hasn't provided an indication that they will accept those projects? So maybe, you know, you can comment just live, you know, what you've already discussed with Max and with James.
Yes, thanks a lot, Belen. I mean, for the utility scale projects, this 14, all of them are moving forward. All the development is taking place within the projects by the consortium and sponsors. Only 3 weeks ago, the sovereign guarantee was initiated by, I think, all of these 14 projects, and this is the dollar sovereign guarantee. 2 naira-based sovereign guarantees were signed last year, but another 12 or 10 were initialed just 3 weeks ago. So that's the government trying to meet one of its own CPs under the PPA. In terms of the tariff, the thing is that the government is also very keen to be seen as sticking to a contract. The PPA is a contract, and the government is trying its best to see that it's sticking with that contract. So you're not going to see a letter from any government agency to a developer that your tariff has been reduced to 7.5 arbitrarily. What you would see, or what might happen, is that once the PSRP, the milestones in there, plus the funding of about 5 billion is available, what the government might do is, and this is in partnership with the DFIs, to say, hey, look, you know what? We've got concessionary finance. We've put in place an improved business operating environment. We've put in place funding to reduce the liquidity constraints. Therefore, can developers take a reduction in their tariffs through the sovereign guarantee instrument? So you're going to have, I think, a discussion, you know, and this will be probably later part of this year. But it will be dependent on ensuring that there's actually an improved business operating environment, and you have the funding available from the DFIs and the World Bank. So that is the approach that will happen. So the projects are making progress. The government is making some progress on its milestones, but not enough progress and not as fast as we would like. But there is optimism among the developers that we will see financial close sometime next year.
Excellent. Do you want to add anything, Ayodele? Because we literally are out of time. So if you want to add something really fast.
No, I haven't got anything to add. He said it all. I mean, we've been working closely on that particular project. We're advising them, providing legal advice. So yes, I mean, I think everything he said is accurate, and it's the same as what I know to be the case.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and also it's been actually great hearing from the two of you, you know, with so much detail. You clearly understand this market really, really well, and I think I'm not the only one to say. Some people here in the chat are saying this was informative and educational. So thank you, Ravor, for your time. Thank you, Ayodele, for your time so much, and thank you for everybody for joining us. Up until next time, I hope to see you soon, and I hope that, you know, really Nigeria becomes the powerhouse that we were talking about. Thank you.
Yeah, we will.
Bye.